What is up guys, Merganman4 here, and with Doctor Who's 60th anniversary just around the corner, I thought now would be the perfect time to celebrate some of the best this franchise has to offer. From now until the 60th, I'll be back every week with a new Top 10. And where else to begin than with the Doctor who started it all? From a junkyard in Totter's Lane to a base in the Antarctic, this Doctor fought fiercely for what he believed in and didn't suffer fools gladly, but was full of warmth and compassion when you scratched beneath the surface. It's fair to say that we wouldn't be talking about Doctor Who today without him, so without further ado, these are my top 10 First Doctor stories. Number 10. Marco Polo.
You are asking me to believe that your caravan can defy the passage of the sun? Move not merely from one place to another, but from today into tomorrow, today into yesterday?
You don't believe me when I say I came from another time.
If I did, Ian, I would give you the key.
Marco Polo was Doctor Who's first proper historical story, and man does it set the bar high. It's a testament to the quality of this story that not only does it totally justify its 7-episode length, but it's one of the few stories to have no surviving footage whatsoever, and yet it remains incredibly engaging and full of life. Thankfully, despite the lack of moving footage, there is a plethora of visual material in the form of telesnaps and behind-the-scenes photos, and it's an incredibly lavish production. Easily one of the best looking stories of the period. The script is equally as rich. It's an excellent exploration of the culture and politics of the time, with a number of memorable guest characters in the likes of Tigana, Ping Cho, Marco Polo, and even a brief appearance from Kublai Khan. Each has a different kind of relationship with the series leads, which keeps things interesting, and Marco Polo in particular makes for a fascinating antagonist, one who's actually friendly with the TARDIS crew and means them no harm, but wants the TARDIS itself to earn his freedom from Kublai Khan's service. Marco is given a very layered performance from Mark Eden, and you can't really fault his position. After all, how can he understand that the TARDIS is their only way home? It's not uncommon for the Doctor and his companions to be cut off from the TARDIS, but this may be the only case where it's always within reach. And indeed, the Doctor succeeds in entering the TARDIS on more than one occasion, but there's always something that prevents them from leaving, enabling Marco to block them out again. It's a unique take on this kind of story, and a clever way to force our leads to go along for the journey. A fascinating dive into 13th century China with some excellent character work along the way, Marco Polo set the standard for what a Doctor Who historical could be, and to this day remains one of the genre's greatest examples. Number 9. Return of the Rocket Men.
Quickly, I fix an oxygen can to my belt, connect the tube and fasten the mask over my face. I hit the release, and the cockpit bubble slides back. I climb outside. Time to make a stand.
Return of the Rocket Men is a great two-parter that really delves into companion Stephen Taylor in a way rarely touched upon in the TV show, taking full advantage of the Companion Chronicles format to get inside his head and explore what makes him tick. In a rarity for this era, things get a bit timey-wimey as the Doctor, Stephen, and Dodo accidentally stumble across a formative part in Stephen's past, and as the story progresses, he realizes the role he must play to keep his own history intact. It's very cleverly done and leads to an emotional climax where Stephen willingly sacrifices himself to ensure events play out as they were meant to, so that he can meet the Doctor and become the person he is now. Of course, this isn't actually the end of Stephen, but it's a very powerful moment nonetheless, and the fact that he was so willing to go through with it is a testament to how his travels with the Doctor have made him a better man. And great as Stephen is here, I also have to compliment the titular Rocket Men, who provide an excellent threat that feels so wonderfully 60s. In particular, their leader, Van Cleef, makes an immediate impression as a ruthless, dangerous man, and despite knowing Stephen survives both in the past and in the present, there are points where you question if he really is going to make it out of this. All in all, this is definitely Stephen's finest hour. A fantastic character piece brought to life beautifully by Peter Purves and guest star Tim Treloar. Number 8. Doctor Who and the Daleks.
There was a silence, and the leader waited for his answer. When it came, it brought a shiver of horror down my spine, and I felt all my nerves and muscles bunching together. I heard one Dalek voice grating out from somewhere. "The planet Skaro is ours, and ours alone."
Doctor Who and the Daleks takes the foundation of the original Dalek serial and both condenses and expands it, much to the story's benefit, giving it a much stronger focus and better pacing, which makes for a highly enjoyable read. Telling the story from Ian's perspective is an inspired choice, making the story feel much more personal and increasing the feeling of terror and dread significantly. In fact, I would argue that's Doctor Who and the Daleks' greatest strength. While the original TV serial does an admirable job of depicting a dead planet and introducing us to the Daleks, the novelization is able to delve into these aspects in a bit more depth, and there were a number of moments that left my heart pounding in anticipation, despite knowing what was coming. This is a story where the Daleks are properly scary, helped massively by the fact that, in the novelization's take on events, this is not only Ian's very first trip in time and space, but he's also only just met his traveling companions in an incredibly atmospheric reimagining of Doctor Who's very first episode. The plight of the Thals is an effective one too. Having been born out of war, they refuse to fight their enemies, and it's a real struggle to convince them to rise up against the Daleks to save themselves. It's a compelling angle that we don't get to see all that often, and it's immensely satisfying when they do decide their lives are worth fighting for, and they take over the Dalek city. To cap it off, David Whittaker's prose is superb, painting a very vivid picture of events and getting inside Ian's mind in a number of effective ways. It's a highly engaging piece of writing that keeps you on the edge of your seat. Doctor Who and the Daleks is an undeniable success. Number 7. The Dalek Invasion of Earth.
We are the masters of the earth.
Not for long.
Obey us or die.
Die? And just who are you to condemn us to death, I think we'd better pit our wits against them and defeat them.
I've recently talked about the Dalek Invasion of Earth in my review of Season 2, and there I stressed what a milestone story this was for the show. And it very much is. I think it's safe to say Doctor Who wouldn't be the same show without it. But it's also an exceptional story in its own right. There's a lot going on, and in a rarity for a story of this length, it not only justifies its 6 parts, but actively takes advantage of them to sell both the scale and the stakes of the Daleks' invasion. I think a big part of why this is successful is how the story utilizes its characters. By splitting up our 4 leads, it enables us to explore many different facets of the Dalek occupation and the varying ways it's affected the people of Earth. It's a fully fleshed out world, and every plot thread feels suitably paid off. Each part gradually builds towards the climax, and it never feels like the story sags or loses steam. Its 6-episode runtime also affords each of our leads their own time in the limelight. In particular, Susan's departure, while not perfect, is still incredibly effective. It's very easy to buy into the bond between her and David, which is carefully built up throughout the story, and the Doctor making the decision for Susan when she can't decide, giving her up to lead a life of her own, remains one of the most unique takes on a companion departure to this day, fitting given their unique relationship. The performances from Carol Ann Ford and William Hartnell are superb, with the Doctor's speech a defining moment of Hartnell's time in the role, and leaving a bittersweet tear in the eye. It's everything you'd want from a story entitled The Dalek Invasion of Earth, and more. Number 6. The Romans.
Now, look here, young lady, let's settle this, insinuating that all this is my fault. My fault? Ha ha!
Unlike the other stories on this list, and indeed most other historicals, The Romans is not a serious story. And that's exactly what I love it for. Doctor Who can be many things, and when you ask me about funny Doctor Who, this is the story that comes to mind. I'll freely admit the plot isn't the strongest, but there's a lot of great character interactions here, both between Ian and Barbara and Vicky and the Doctor. The story opening with the Doctor and his companions just relaxing and enjoying each other's company is the kind of scene I feel we don't often get in Doctor Who, but it goes a long way in making them relatable and giving us insight into their relationships. It helps, of course, that the performances are superb all around. I would honestly consider this a strong contender for Hartnell's best performance in the role. He's clearly having the time of his life. Hartnell's Doctor could absolutely be grumpy, but anyone who thinks it's his only trait has clearly never seen the Romans. I always have a blast watching him fumble through his situation, with his quick-witted solutions on full display. The guest cast is also hugely entertaining to watch, and in particular, Derek Francis Nero is the source of many of the story's greatest moments, both funny and dramatic, as he's simultaneously the butt of many of the story's jokes, yet also acts as a credible threat due to his position of power and total lack of moral scruples. I'm not sure whether I'd call The Romans one of Doctor Who's best stories in the strictest sense of the word, but it's absolutely one of my favorites. I rarely have as much fun with Doctor Who as I have when watching The Romans. Number 5. The Barbarians and the Samurai.
I'd say we're in the late 18th or 19th century, and that's very bad for us.
Why?
Because in this time, foreigners are banned from Japan, and the penalty for being caught here is death. That's barbaric. To the Japanese of this time, Susan, we're the barbarians.
It's surprising to me how few stories in the Doctor Who universe explore Asian history and culture. There's so many rich and interesting possibilities. Thankfully, the First Doctor's era has it covered, with the barbarians and the samurai being the second such story on this list, taking full advantage of its setting and its status as a pure historical to delve into a fascinating period of Japanese history. One where foreigners were banned on pain of death and the way of the samurai was still abundant. I came out of this story feeling much more knowledgeable about both the culture and the time period, which is always a huge plus in my books. But of course, that's not all that makes a good story, and the educational aspects are bolstered by a great guest cast, ranging from the power-hungry daimyo Mamoru to the disgraced samurai Shumei, as well as a good number of twists and turns that keep you on your toes and enhances the feeling of ever-present danger. It's a clever use of the time period and takes advantage of the fact that foreigners aren't allowed, not just to increase the threat of death, but also, if only briefly, put the Doctor and co. into a case of mistaken identity, as the daimyo has enlisted the help of foreigners in his plot to overthrow the Emperor. It's an excellent combination of elements that encapsulates pretty much everything I love about the pure historical genre, with a standout setting and brilliantly performed by all involved. Number 4. The 10th Planet.
You must come and live with us.
But we cannot live with you. You're different. You've got no feelings.
Feelings? I do not understand that word.
Emotions, love, pride, hate, fear. Have you no emotions, sir?
In all of Doctor Who, the Cybermen are arguably the only monsters to rival the Daleks in popularity, and this is where they got their start. I would argue, and I'm not sure many would disagree with me, that the Cybermen are also very challenging to do right and often fall short of their potential. Because of that, it's a testament that nearly 60 years later, the 10th Planet stands up as one of their best and most terrifying appearances. Not just in their design, which is of course excellent, but as an introduction to their species, determined to survive at any cost. The idea of a sister planet to Earth that's drifted off into space and is now returned is a fantastic concept and drives home what is, in my opinion, the scariest part of the Cybermen, one which often seems to get forgotten, that they're twisted versions of ourselves, that we could become like them. The scene where the Doctor and Polly question the Cybermen on their motives and lack of feelings is chillingly effective. Hartnell in particular is excellent throughout, with his outrage at the Cybermen's failure to understand why they should care about people suffering and dying a particular highlight. It's a real shame he fell ill partway through filming, but the material he does have is great. I also love that we get a secondary villain in Cutler, who can be dangerously unpredictable and kind of the opposite of the Cybermen, someone who perhaps relies too much on emotion, eventually becoming willing to inflict catastrophic damage to Earth in an attempt to save his son. It basically means our leads have to fight a war on two fronts, ensuring a constant threat even when the Cybermen aren't in the room. And of course, the Cybermen aren't the only iconic aspect of Doctor Who to debut here. The 10th Planet also lays claim to the Doctor's very first regeneration. It's a very abrupt, almost trippy experience, which I actually think works quite well in putting the audience in Ben and Polly's shoes. They couldn't have intended it at the time, but I think it's rather fitting that a process we now all take for granted started out as this scary, confusing, completely unknowable thing, where no one had a clue what was going on. Similarly, the Doctor's statement of "it's far from being all over" is wonderfully prosaic, and its meaning grows deeper with every new Doctor we get. The 10th Planet is a story that hasn't only stood the test of time, but also gotten better with age. A fantastic way to cap off the very first era of the show. Number 3. The Daleks' Master Plan.
Let's go, Doctor. I've seen enough of this.
Well, my boy, we finally rid this planet of Daleks.
Brent! Katerina!
Sarah. What a waste. What a terrible waste.
The Daleks' Master Plan is kind of hard to pin down because it's such a massive story, both in length and in scale. It kind of feels like an expansion on the previous season's The Chase, with much of the plot revolving around our heroes being chased through space and time by the Daleks, but I think this story utilizes the concept to much stronger effect. In particular, having much higher stakes, and while it does have some frivolous padding, it feels a lot meatier and substantial on the whole, with a much stronger guest cast and the Daleks a terribly imposing threat. Key to this is the story's willingness to commit to consequences. The heroes do ultimately save the day, but at a terrible cost, losing not just one but 3 newly found friends along the way. It's a devastating story for both the Doctor and Steven, and even though we've only just met Katerina, Brett, and Sarah, their deaths, especially Sarah's, hit hard. And while the Daleks themselves are excellent here, I would say they aren't actually the serial's most memorable villain. That honor belongs to Mavic Chen, Guardian of the Solar System, played with just the right amount of arrogance, superiority, and madness by Kevin Stoney, and his interactions with the Daleks, both determined to be the ones in command, lead to some of the story's best moments. It's also great fun seeing the monk pop up for a couple of episodes in the latter half of the story. It's a nice surprise that slots in rather naturally and adds some levity before the devastating conclusion. Now, the big question is, with a runtime of nearly 5 hours, does it justify its length? I'm not quite sure it does. I think you could fairly easily cut out an episode or two of material and not lose anything of value. But I think that's a testament to the strength of this story, where the rest of the material is so good that it not only justifies it, it makes the criticism eminently irrelevant. The Daleks' Master Plan is a story of epic proportions that goes above and beyond, with everyone at the top of their games, and that shines through, even when 3/4 of the story is missing. Number 2. Farewell, Great Macedon.
Alexander, who had been watching the setting up of the machine in a subdued and thoughtful silence, raised a shaking hand.
No.
What do you mean, no?
I will not be treated.
But this can save your life.
I want to die. I have decided.
This story actually reminds me a lot of Marco Polo, a lengthy epic centered around a historical figure whom our leads befriend over a period of weeks, whilst conspiracies and plots of murder surround them. But much as I love that story, Farewell Great Macedon does pretty much everything I enjoy about it and more. And make no mistake, the comparison isn't meant to downplay the former. It is also on this list after all, and it certainly doesn't imply a lack of originality with the latter. Indeed, while it may have a similar feel, it doesn't ever come across as a retread, and like the best historicals, we enter a rich period of history that we can simultaneously learn a lot about, whilst also having a sufficient scope for drama, character growth, and even fun. Alexander the Great proves an excellent center for the story, and the tragedy as he gradually loses his closest friends before eventually dying himself, whilst the Doctor Susan, Ian, and Barbara can only stand by helplessly, is both written and performed with incredible sincerity. Additionally, even at 3.5 hours long, the story never loses steam. It's a gradual build-up that feels perfectly paced, and by the end, I was just left impressed by the epic scale of the story and how well handled and authentic it all felt. It's also a testament to the strength of the performances, of which there are just 3, with a hefty amount of narration that I almost forget it isn't a full-cast audio drama. I'm fully transported into the world of the story, which feels as rich and vivid as if I were actually there. It's a case of a story not only embracing its format, but surpassing it and becoming so much more. It's a perfect slice of 60s Who. And before we reach my number 1 First Doctor story, let's take a quick look at some honorable mentions which very nearly made the cut. The Time Meddler, The Invention of Death, Rise and Fall, The Suffering, The War Machines. Number 1, The Aztecs.
This is the beginning of the end of the Sun God.
What are you talking about?
Oh, don't you see? If I could start the destruction of everything that's evil here, then everything that is good would survive when Cortes lands.
But you can't rewrite history. Not one line.
And here we have the ultimate culmination of the pure historical genre. The Aztecs is an incredibly gripping story with some serious character drama and a fascinating exploration of the responsibilities of time travel. Of course, Doctor Who has long since started playing by different rules, but that's part of what makes the Aztecs so special. It's a fundamentally 60s Doctor Who story, and you genuinely couldn't tell it with anywhere near the same impact today. The core of the conflict comes between the Doctor and Barbara, the latter having been mistaken for a reincarnated goddess, trying to use her newfound influence to change the Aztecs' way of life for the better, and the Doctor warning her of the dangers, not just the time, but also the emotional ramifications, as it's implied here that not only shouldn't you try to change history, but that you literally can't, and indeed, Barbara is ultimately unsuccessful in her attempts. But the story isn't without hope, and ends with a message that's still relevant to Doctor Who today. Even if you can't change a civilization, you can still impact the individuals within it for the better. This is emphasized through the High Priest Otlok, who, by the end of the story, begins to question the Aztec's way of life and goes off on his own to find himself. Kameka, too, proves to have been positively impacted by the Doctor. The sole instance in classic Who where the Doctor shows any inkling of romantic affection for someone else, and as someone who's generally not a fan of that sort of thing, it actually really works here, and it's clear that the Doctor has great affection and respect for Kameka, and leads to some brilliant bits of comedy, such as his realization that he's accidentally proposed to her. Indeed, the TARDIS traveler's inability to fit in, and in some cases refusal to participate in Aztec practices, frequently gets them in trouble. Sometimes in an amusing way, such as the proposal, but oftentimes under threat of physical punishment or even death. The High Priest Totoxal leads the campaign against them, being the first to become suspicious of Barbara's authenticity, and is the kind of villain who's simultaneously great fun to watch and genuinely threatening. A little less prominent is Ian's part in the story, as he's mostly relegated to training for battle over the title of commander of the Aztec army, but it's still a compelling watch, and it's entertaining to see Ian outwit his opponent, knowing he can't win with brute strength, and his opponent outwitting him back by receiving the Doctor's assistance, who's unaware of Ian's involvement. Ultimately, this is everything I want from a pure historical, giving new insight into a different time and culture, whilst giving a strong character drama and countering the more serious moments with carefully interwoven lighthearted ones. The Aztecs is, simply put, Doctor Who at its very best. But what do you think? Were there any surprise inclusions? Did I leave out your top choice? Let me know what your favorite First Doctor stories are down in the comments below. And with that, Merganman4 over and out, and I'll see you all next week with my top 10 Second Doctor stories.